My message today is called Coming Home, parentheses, to Ourselves and Saving the World. I thought about saying healing the world, and that's good too. But let's put the pressure on us and say, when we come home to ourselves, we may save the world. Now, I know there are skeptics out there, so let's get started. I'm reading a book called The Good Ancestor, a Radical Prescription for Long-Term Thinking. And I'm intrigued by what it means to be a good ancestor. Since I'm of a certain age, I'll be thinking about becoming an ancestor. And of course, I'm not sure that I am a good one, nor do I think most of us in North America are. As one earth scientist says, we are the first generation to know that we face unprecedented global environmental risks, and at the same time, we are the last generation with significant chance to do something about it. Let that sink in. Anthropologist Mary Catherine Bateson wrote, "The great irony of our time is that even as we are living longer, we are thinking shorter." Much of what is happening on the political and financial scenes right now is driven by short-termism. This is the age of the tyranny of the now. We prefer parties to pensions. Parties today, pensions tomorrow. Now, it's true that we are made for pleasure, and it's good to seek pleasure in the present moment. The sensual and sexual pleasures of our life are built into our bodies, into our physicality, and yet sometimes the pleasure system goes awry and focuses only on short-term impulses that can easily become addictions or focus us on and remove our focus from life priorities. And this is especially true if we're busy denying and repressing such pleasure. For example, repeated denials of good and pleasurable things may lead us to overwork or overspend as a compensation. The denial of pleasure can lead some of us to act out our anger or resentment on other people, or becoming self-centered to the exclusion of others. But I digress. Here's an example of what we are up against. The founding president of the Facebook indicated that the entire objective of that company was, and I quote, "How do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible?" So the author of this book calls short-termism a straitjacket. I call it a spiritual crisis. He writes, "What seems to matter now is the tax year, not the solar year, the quarterly report, not the 4 seasons, the electoral cycles, not the carbon cycle. Indeed, we are now altering nature's cycles." I read some years ago that humanity is the only species that fouls its own nest. Short-termism. The inability to take into account future generations and the long-term consequences. It's a huge problem. Tax year, quarterly reports are from a materialistic frame that is focused on the right now, the economic bottom line, without regard to the changing of the seasons, the natural world, and its resources. But when we shift to the solar year and the changing of the seasons, now we begin to move into a spiritual direction. It shifts our gaze outward beyond our small little worlds. So, our inability to think and act long term is a spiritual problem. So in this regard, we've lost our way. And the U.S. is leading the way in that. We have gone into the far country with the prodigal son. We have rolled away into the deep corner like a lost coin. And like the lost sheep, we have wandered far from the community that keeps us safe, and as a result have gotten lost in the wilderness of individualism and profit-driven short-termism. Inasmuch as we are sucked into the Western model of economics, bottom lines, and so forth, we have lost our spiritual roots. Inasmuch as we fail to appreciate and protect the natural world, we fail to be good stewards of God's creation, that is our nest. Inasmuch as we refuse to push back on cultural favoritism of some bodies more than other bodies, with its racist and homophobic and erotophobic and sexist frame, we have lost our Jesus, and there's no good news in that kind of a gospel. We are lost sheep in the wilderness, lost coins in the deep recesses of emptiness, and lost sons wandering in a far country. How do we turn this around? How do we become good ancestors? I haven't finished the book, so I don't know. But I'm going to tell you what I think. In some traditions, the solar year and the seasonal changes were and are celebrated with ritual and with gratitude and humility. And caring for one's natural surroundings was and is understood as a spiritual practice. It's an imperative in their spirituality. So, can Christianity return to its roots of spiritual connection found in the Garden of Eden? Can we connect to the animals and the plants and consider how to protect and preserve so we can be good ancestors? Can we get our minds off the church's obsession with sin and salvation and connect instead to the Jesus story of love and celebration? That was a radical statement, in case you didn't catch that. Can we get in touch with the wonder of living, that every single day is a gift that has been granted, and live each day in gratitude, and live as a future holder? A future holder is someone who lives by the Apache saying, "We do not inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." There's a sign at the Unitarian Church in my neighborhood that says, "The best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago. The second best time is today." And this reminds me of a woman I want to share with you about, Wangari Maathai from Kenya, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. At the age of 37, she responded to the needs of the rural women in her country of Kenya. The streams were drying up because there were no roots or trees holding the water. Their food supply was less secure. They had to walk farther and farther away to get firewood for fuel and fencing. So she founded the Greenbelt movement and organized the women, encouraged them to grow seedlings and plant trees together to bind the soil, to store the rainwater, and in providing food and firewood, they received a small monetary reward for their work. Since 1977, that organization has planted over 51 million trees. And by the way, one single large tree can provide a day's supply of oxygen for 4 people. 3.1 trillion trees worldwide absorbs about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that we produce each year. A future holder is one who abides by the community strategy of the Iroquois to make no decisions unless the impact has first been considered for 7 generations. It is to expand the definition of the golden rule to be much wider. Do unto future generations as you would have past generations do unto you. Maathai found that underneath all the planetary degradation and deforestation of the environment and food insecurity, there were deeper issues: disempowerment, the loss of traditional values of the community, And those values are what enabled the community to protect the environment, to work together for mutual benefit, and to do selflessly and honestly. To be in the wilderness, or lost in emptiness, or wandering in a far country is to be disempowered. Most North Americans are, because when we invest in the world's values, we have to give up our personal power and replace it in the empire. But a collection of disempowered people can never create a powerful community. So, who are you to believe that you are not powerful? Who are you to believe you are not beautiful? Who are you to believe you don't make a difference in your community, or that you're just a little peon of little importance? Who told you to stay quiet and know your place? Who told you your body was sinful? Who told you you weren't smart enough, that your goals weren't worthy, that you could not do that which your heart desires to do? It was impossible. Who told you that? Because that voice, or those voices, are liars. All of them. Come home. It is time to come home to ourselves, to the God inside who whispers to us, I see you, I love you, you are mine, come on home. Ma'atai tells the story of a hummingbird who lives in a forest with all the animals. One day there was a huge fire and the hummingbird was very distressed. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? And it got worse and worse. And so the hummingbird decided she's going to fly to the river and pick up a drop of water and carry it back to the fire and drop it on the fire. And she did that, back and forth. And all the animals of the forest had escaped and they were on the sidelines there and they watched her go back and forth with her drop of water to the fire. And then Mahatai concludes the story by saying, we all have choices. We can sit on the sidelines and be safe with the empire, or we can be a hummingbird. She said, I choose to be the hummingbird. We can remain disempowered and believe the lies of the culture. After all, the prodigal son story has two sons. Although he was still living at home, the eldest son was in his own far country, believing he was not worthy of a celebration or a party, never trusting the goodness of his father's love, never appreciating all that was already here, already available abundantly for him. When we give up our power, we remain in the far country just as he did. Sitting on the sidelines is to remain hiding in the dark corners with that lost coin. Or we can come home to our own inner wisdom, that inner voice of God that says, I have great plans for us to consider together. Wangari Maathai listened and carried her single drop of water to the fire. And now there are 51 million trees in a once barren land, and now the water flows. Women and communities are empowered. This happens because one person chose to be a hummingbird, someone who came home to herself. I believe she understood what Teresa of Avila, a Christian mystic, said in the 16th century. She said, Christ now has no body but yours. No hands or feet on earth but yours. Yours are the feet with which Christ walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which Christ blesses the world. Yours are the eyes through which Christ looks with compassion into the world. This is the power of homecoming. When we come home, it is to come home to where we belong, in the arms of God. We begin to see who God made us to be. Not perfect, just following the whispers that are inside of each of us. Once we finally come home to that realization and embrace it and live it, then together we have the power to save the world. May it be so. Amen.